The sun burned like a merciless eye over the empty plains, its heat pressing against the earth until even the shadows flinched away, leaving nothing but raw desert stretching to the far-off horizons. Dust drifted in lazy spirals around the wooden fence line of the old ranch, where a lone woman was tied, her wrists bound tightly to the weathered posts, her breathing ragged but steady. She was an Apache woman, her presence a striking contrast to the bleached landscape around her. Her dark braids fell across her shoulders, and although exhaustion pulled at her face, her eyes held a flame that had not yet been dimmed. A bruise throbbed deep and angry on her shoulder, but she didn't cry out. She didn't plead. She simply stared forward, waiting. And then the cowboy arrived. His boots crunched over the sand as he approached, slow and deliberate, like a man walking toward a truth he didn't want to face. He wore the dust of long rides and old regrets, his jaw clenched as if every decision in his life had led him to this moment. In his right hand he carried a coiled rope, not yet used but heavy with implication. As he came closer, the woman lifted her chin, not in fear, but in defiance so sharp it cracked through the silence. "Do whatever you want," she said, her voice steady despite the pain threading beneath it. "Do whatever you want, cowboy." For a moment the cowboy froze. Something flickered in his eyes, a hesitation, a wound, a memory. He had taken part in many things on this land, cattle drives, border disputes, firefights over water rights and territory. He had seen men fight, surrender, and beg. But never had he seen someone tied to a fence with so much dignity, so much unbroken fire, that it made him question whether he was the one trapped instead. He stepped closer, trying to regain the hard edge he carried like a badge. "You're trespassing," he said. "You were warned not to come near this ranch. Go where I need to," she replied. "My people's land doesn't end just because your fences say it." "Does." Her words hit him like a thrown knife, not because of defiance, but because they were true and he knew it. The ranch had been built by pushing boundaries, expanding lines, taking more than what was theirs. But that wasn't the story he was raised with. He was taught that cattle needed space, that men needed land, that the future belonged to those who could seize it. And yet here she stood, tied to the fence that symbolized everything wrong with that world. The cowboy tried to steel himself, telling his racing heart that he had done the right thing capturing her. She'd been spying near the cattle pens, or so he thought. She'd been gathering information for someone else, maybe for a rival band, maybe for someone wanting to sabotage his ranch. But the longer he looked at her, the less certain he became. She didn't look like a spy. She didn't look like a saboteur. She looked like someone who had been driven by necessity, not deception. Her arms strained against the ropes, and he finally noticed how tightly she'd been tied by the ranch hands who'd, caught her earlier that morning. He cursed under his breath. They hadn't shown restraint, and her bruises proved it. He reached out without thinking, placing a steady hand near her shoulder, checking the damage. She flinched, not from pain, but from instinct. But she didn't ask him to stop. Instead, she watched him, studying him as carefully as he studied her. "You're not like them," she said quietly. "You have a choice." The cowboy hated how those words touched something in him, an old part of him, buried beneath years of dust and silence. "I'm doing my job," he muttered. "That's all?" "Then do it," she said, her voice rising with unexpected force despite her exhaustion. "If you want to scare me, do it. If you want to break me, do it. If you want me gone, do it. But know this, your rope doesn't own me. Your fence doesn't stop me. And your land was never yours to begin with." The cowboy's breath caught. Her defiance shook him more than any weapon could. He stepped back, the rope slackening in his grip. For a long moment, they remained frozen beneath the glare of the desert sun, two worlds, bound by a single decision neither had expected to face. Then from somewhere down the ranch trail, the distant thunder of hooves broke the silence. Someone was coming. The cowboy turned, eyes narrowing at the dust cloud rising in the distance. Whoever it was, they were riding fast, too fast. The Apache woman watched him, her breathing still shallow but her gaze sharp. "Your men?" she asked. "No," he said, a tremor in his voice. "Whoever that is, they aren't mine." And at that exact moment, something in the air shifted, danger, destiny, and the first twist of a story that neither of them saw coming. The riders drew closer, the thunder of their hooves rolling across the desert like distant gunfire, as a swarm of dust lifted in their wake. The cowboy's pulse quickened, not because he feared them, but because he didn't know who they were. In these lands, unexpected riders rarely meant anything good. The Apache woman watched with tense focus, her wrists still bound but her spirit unbroken. She didn't plead for the cowboy to untie her, didn't ask for mercy or help. Instead, she merely watched him, as if trying to understand the storm brewing inside him. The cowboy stood conflicted. One part of him wanted to mount his horse and face the riders head on. Another part urged him to cut the ropes binding the woman so she wouldn't become a target. But an even deeper part of him, one he rarely listened to, whispered that leaving her tied now would be a betrayal far worse than anything the riders could bring. As they approached, the cowboy recognized the lead rider, a harsh-faced rancher named Briggs, a man known for settling disputes through fear rather than fairness. Briggs had always considered the Apache people a threat, and seeing him now sent a cold wave through the cowboy's chest. Briggs pulled his horse to an abrupt stop, dust swirling around the group like a veil. "Heard you caught yourself a spy," Briggs barked, leaning forward in the saddle. "Thought we'd come take her off your hands." The cowboy stiffened. "She's not a spy," he replied carefully. "She was just passing through." Briggs let out a cruel laugh. "Passing through? On my land? On your land? Girl like that doesn't just pass through. She's gathering information. Boy, you know that." The cowboy's fingers twitched toward the handle of his holstered revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead, he stepped slightly in front of the bound woman, a gesture so small most men wouldn't have noticed. But Briggs did. His eyes narrowed. "You protecting her?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. The cowboy felt the woman behind him shift, her breath steady despite the tension crackling like lightning in the air. She still didn't speak, but her presence alone was a warning. One wrong word could ignite a fire none of them could put out. Briggs dismounted, stomping toward the fence with heavy, angry steps. "Step aside," he ordered. "We're taking her in. We'll get answers our way." The cowboy didn't move. He didn't blink. "Your way is torture," he said, voice rough but controlled. "And she doesn't deserve that." Briggs grabbed the cowboy's vest, yanking him closer. "You going soft?" he growled. "They've taken cattle, water, land, and now you want to play hero for one of them?" The cowboy stepped back, forcing the older man's hand off him. "This isn't justice," he said. "It's revenge. And I'm not letting you near her." That was the spark. Briggs's eyes flashed with rage, his hand darting toward his gun. The cowboy reacted instantly, drawing his own revolver and leveling it at the man's chest. Gasps erupted from the riders behind Briggs, the horses shifting nervously as dust swirled between the men. "Don't!" the cowboy warned. "Not today." The Apache woman watched the standoff with tense focus, her breath steady despite the stakes now towering around her. She had known men like Briggs all her life, men who believed the land belonged to them simply because they claimed it loudly enough. But she had also known men like the cowboy, quiet ones, conflicted ones, men who carried old wounds but still searched for what was right. Briggs hesitated, but he finally lowered his hand, scowling. "You've lost your damn mind," he spat. "All this for a woman who trespassed on your land?" The cowboy's grip on the revolver tightened, but his voice softened. "Not just for her," he said. "For what's right." Briggs mounted his horse, glaring down at him. "You just made yourself an enemy," he warned. "Remember that." With a hard jerk of the reins, he and his men turned, galloping back across the plains, their dust trailing behind them like a warning. When the last rider disappeared into the horizon, the cowboy finally lowered his gun and turned to the woman. Her eyes, calm, assessing, strong, watched him. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he admitted, walking toward her and cutting the ropes with his knife. "But you said I had a choice." She rubbed her wrists gently, freeing her arms for the first time in hours. She didn't run, didn't flee. Instead, she stood before him, her gaze steady. "You chose well," she said. "But now your own people will turn on you." The cowboy nodded. "Maybe," he said. "But I'll face that." She studied him for a long moment, then spoke words he didn't expect. "Then I won't let you face it alone." The wind shifted, carrying her words across the open desert, the beginning of a bond. Neither of them planned, but both of them needed. And though the danger had only just begun, the cowboy knew one truth with absolute certainty. The moment he chose to protect her, his life changed forever.